Hi everyone, it's John from RFM Calc, and today I'm talking about EKM Shop. So EKM is a UK-based software as a service e-commerce platform. It was originally launched in 2002, so it's been going nearly 20 years now, which is certainly a considerable time in the e-commerce space. And according to their website, it currently powers 80,000 stores, which is a significant amount. They claim to be the UK's #1 online shop provider. I'm not sure the methodology behind that, but I'm sure it's valid in some form. I'm assuming they're the UK's #1 in terms of being based in the UK as a provider, rather than the #1 most used platform by UK businesses. But either way, whichever way you look at it, 80,000 stores is a significant amount, which is why I wanted to talk about them today. So you won't be surprised to know that, like any good e-commerce platform, EKM integrates with RFM Calc no problem. So that's what we're going to talk about today in terms of how do we get that data from EKM into RFM Calc so that you can generate all your lifetime value, average time between orders, customer cohort analysis, obviously the RFM analysis as well. So I'll take you through that now in this video. In terms of my personal exposure to EKM, so it's not a platform I've used for a few years. I did have a little bit of exposure to it a few years ago, but I have to say, setting up this trial to record this video, it seems quite a straightforward platform to use. It's quite intuitive, quite easy to set up, and like I say, it's no problem to export the data, which is what we'll need to do in order to allow us to import it into RFM Calc. So what I've done is I've created a free trial account and done a little bit of setup on that in advance, obviously, of this video. So when you log in, this is your EKM dashboard area. So you can see you've got quite a few options across the top here that you can customize. So this is my general dashboard, just with a nice tick list of all the things I need to do. I've set up a few products. I've also done a little tiny bit on the design work as well. Obviously, this is just a test store that I've set up. So you can customize your design here. There's an analytics section. Now, this isn't accessible on the free package, so I can't really see the reports that are available on EKM. But I would assume that out of the box, it's probably not going to come with the level of reporting that the RFM Calc gives you, which is what you'd expect, because no e-commerce platform does, in terms of those lifetime value and average time between orders and cohort analysis and so on. But that's not a problem. That's what we're going to explain today. So what I have done as part of this test is set up a few test orders. So if I go to the order screen here, you can see I've just set up a handful of test orders here, which I put through manually on the website. So I've set up a few test products. You can see we've got different amounts, and I've placed a few orders over the past few days during my trial. Now, in order to get this data into RFM Calc, we need to export these orders. So you might think that if I just select all the orders, there'd be an option here to export. Unfortunately, there isn't. So what is clear is that there isn't a native way to export orders from EKM out of the box into a CSV file, which is what we need to do. However, it's not actually that difficult to add this feature, which is definitely a positive. So if I go to features here, what you have here is kind of similar to the plugin library or module library you'll find on other platforms like Shopify or WooCommerce. There's a lot of different things here that you can install very easily. And the one I'm looking for, if I just search for export, it's this import export system here. So all I need to do is click on this and just click install feature down here and just wait a little second. There we go. And you can see that's now installed. I'm not sure the significance of this image, to be honest. But what the important thing is that we can see we've now got the export feature available. So all I need to do, you can get back to this just by going to features. And you can see at the top under installed features, we've got the import export system. So now all I need to do is go to export to file here and click export data. And now this gives me the option to export based on a number of different parameters, and I can export various different data. So you can export products, categories, images, customers. But what I'm looking for, of course, is orders. So if I just click export orders, you can choose a date range. So I'm going to just go for all orders because obviously it's a small range. You could just potentially go for the last couple of years. You can then choose which order field you want to export. So what I would say is this is quite a nice feature. So even though it's not actually there straight away when you log in, the export feature, I would still class this as native to EKM because it's very easy to install. It's part of their kind of available modules. So it's nice that they've gone to the effort of letting you select which fields you want to export. So for our purposes, it's absolutely fine to include all of those. I suppose if you were doing a lot of exports and you wanted smaller files, you could potentially untick some of these that you don't need for your reporting with RFM Calc. But I think for this stage, it's absolutely fine to include all of them. Next, we go to formatting. So you've got a couple of options here in terms of single line or multi-line. So single line means all the product data will be included on a single CSV line, basically in one column. Multi-line means that the product data will be included on subsequent lines. So RFM Calc could work with either. So Shopify by default will export multi-line, whereas platforms like Magento will always be single line. For our purposes, we don't actually need the product data, so I'm just going to stick with single line. But if you did choose multi-line here, or you were already using multi-line for another system and you wanted to stick with that when exporting to RFM Calc, that's absolutely fine, and RFM Calc will handle that no problem. Next, we need to go to the download type. So you can see you've got a few options here in terms of downloading as an Excel file or an XML or even a compressed CSV or file as well, so it can zip it up for you if you want. All that we need is the standard CSV, and we definitely want it to be comma delimited, not semicolon delimited, so go for comma delimited there, and then just click CSV file. And it now prepares the file for download, and it will instantly push it to the browser. So it doesn't do it on a queuing based system, but it will just push it straight here. But my understanding is if you have a large data set, it will handle that okay. Obviously, I'm only testing here with quite a small number of orders, but from what I understand, even if you have quite a few orders, this will kind of just work in a sensible way and not time out. So all you need to do then is just click to download, and we can save the file. Okay, so now we've downloaded our file, let's have a look how the file is structured. So this is a copy of the file that I've just downloaded that I've just converted to an Excel file so we can spread out the columns and so on, make it a little bit easier to read than the standard raw CSV. So you can see, firstly, the order data is structured oldest to newest. So different e-commerce platforms do this in different ways. Some e-commerce platforms like Shopify, for example, will export newest to oldest by default. A lot of platforms such as Magento and obviously EKM export oldest to newest. Neither matters for RFM Calc. We can work with both, and we'll auto detect that for you when you upload the file. You've then got this action of order. There, you've got the order number. Now, the customer user ID is interesting. You'll see this is set to 0 for all the orders. Now, the reason for that is that as I place my test orders, I did them all as a guest checkout. You do have the option to create an account and sign in, at which point you'd be assigned a customer ID. But because all my orders are guest orders, essentially, they don't have one. So that's something to bear in mind when you're thinking about the best identifier to use for your customer ID. You probably don't want to use this unless you're forcing checkout for all your customers. You've then got the order item ID, which is separated with a colon for orders with more than one item. And then the product ID, the payment on delivery is the test payment method I set up for these orders. Order date I've mentioned. You've got the delivery cost, tax cost, discounts, subtotal, and then total cost, which is basically the subtotal plus the delivery and tax. So this total cost is there. You then got the billing email address, which is probably what you want to use as your customer identifier. We'll come back to that in a second, but you can see that's populated for every order. You've then got the billing details in terms of first name and last name. So some e-commerce platforms combine that into one field. EKM keeps first name and last name separate, which is useful. You've got the company, then the various address fields as well. You've got a telephone field as well. Then what you have here is if you're shipping to a different address to the billing address, this will be set to true. So you can see for most of my test orders, I just ship to the billing address, so this is set to false. But then for one of the test orders, this one here, I did put a different delivery address in, so you can see that's set to true. But what's useful is that regardless of if that's true or false, EKM will still populate the shipping delivery fields. So obviously in the case of this one, which is true, these are different to the billing address. But for the other ones, even though the billing address is the same as the shipping address, it's still populated the shipping address field, which is useful as well when you're thinking about importing this data. And then finally, we've got a few additional fields. So we've got the current order status. So I dispatched the first couple, but then the rest are processing. You've got the transaction details. You've got a bit more information about the product name as well. Delivery methods there as well in terms of the delivery method. And then we've got some product details here in terms of the product price, product quantity, and so on. Again, because we've exported in that single line format that I mentioned before, every product piece of information is combined in one column, so it's separated just by a colon there, because these products, or these orders I should say, had more than one product on them, so it's combined that information. So for example, product price is combined into one column for both products on that order. So I suggest if you did need the product information, obviously we don't for RFM Calc in terms of how RFM Calc works and calculates that data, but if you did need the product information, then the multi-line CSV is probably a better option, and I've exported a test one of those as well. Just 1 second. So you can see I've got my multi-line CSV export here. So this is very similar really to the previous single line format, but what you'll see is you've got the order row at the top here, which is the same, but then you've got the order item, which basically lists out the individual products purchased on that order. So even if an order only has one item on it, it will still have this order item line, so it's quite uniform like that. And then you can see on these orders, so looking kind of row 8 to 10, you can see there's one order line, but 2 order item lines because that order had 2 products on it. So if I scroll across, you can see all the fields are basically the same as we had before. But instead of trying to combine the product price, for example, into that one top order line, which was happening before, it's then listing out all the products on that order separately on separate lines. So if you need to access the product information from the CSV, that's probably an easier format to use. What I would say is that RFM Calc could handle this as well. So even if you export in a multi-line format and then import into RFM Calc, we'll still be able to handle this file just fine. We'll basically combine based on the order number into one row. So Shopify does this by default and lists products on multiple lines. That's no problem for RFM Calc. But if you're only using this export from EKM for RFM Calc, it's probably still better to use the single line format, because then you're just avoiding having these extra lines that you don't need. And obviously these extra lines will count against your upload count as well, in terms of the maximum number of order lines you're allowed on your account plan. But it's useful. I just wanted to demonstrate this just so you can see the difference, because like I say, certainly if you did need access to that product information for something else, then the multi-line format is useful. Okay, so now that we've kind of understood the format, let's see how we could import it into RFM Calc. So I'm just going to go to my RFM Calc account here, my test account, and let's make a new project. So we're just going to call it test EKM. So we don't need many settings for now. The default project currency is fine in GBP because I'm in the UK and that's what I've set my test store up in. Now for the date column, what I would suggest, if we just go back, let me get rid of the multi-line, to the single line order format, you can see it's exported the date in a day/month/year, which is the default UK format. So this, I'm not sure if it does this for every store, but certainly for this store, I've obviously set it up in the UK, so it's giving me the UK date format. So if your date is formatted like this, then it would be safest to force the UK's date format here. Attempt to force European date interpretation. It's the safest option, because what you can have otherwise is, because of that confusion of US dates having going month then date rather than date then month, and you can get issues if you don't tell RFM Calc which one you're using. So in this particular instance, if you can see the dates here, they're very much in that UK European date format, so it's sensible just to make sure that's forced here. The date ordering, as I mentioned, EKM lists oldest to newest, but you can just leave the auto detect. That's fine. That's no problem at all. And then, yeah, that's all the settings we need now for the project. So I've got my test EKM project now, and all I'm going to do is go into that and schedule my first report. So you can see I've got my CSV file. So this is exactly the same as the Excel file, the single line version I was just looking at, but I've just left it obviously as the raw CSV, so I can upload it now into RFM Calc. And now it's just a case of mapping the columns. So for the order ID, what we said, if I just go back to here, is to use the order number. Now, EKM just put slashes in the order number, which is fairly unusual, I would say, for e-commerce platforms. Not a problem at all for RFM Calc, but just something to bear in mind if you're exporting EKM orders into a different platform that might not be expecting kind of funny symbols such as slashes. Just something there to bear in mind, but absolutely not a problem for RFM Calc. Now the order date, we've said we'll use the order date column. Currency code. Now, I don't think EKM has one, which is fine. Yeah, it doesn't have a currency code column, and that's fine. Everything's in GBP for us anyway, so that's no problem. So we can ignore that. Now, for the order value, what I would suggest you use is the total cost. You can use the subtotal, which excludes the delivery and tax, if that's more suitable to your reporting. I always like to include everything just to give the most complete picture, so I'm going to select total cost for that. Now the order status column isn't needed, but what this allows you to do, if I just find the order status all the way over here, you can see we've got a status column. What I can do is I can filter out potentially, let's say, processing statuses. And basically all this allows you to do is just filter out any statuses you don't want to include in the reporting without having to manually go through and take those out of your CSV. So you can see I've selected status as a status column, and then if I just select processing as the status that I want to exclude, it will only then include what's left, which is in this case the dispatched orders. But like I say, that's not essential. There's a little bit of help there if you get stuck, and you can comma separate multiple statuses. Now for the customer ID column, what I'm going to do there is not use the customer user ID for the reasons I explained before, because these are all guest purchases. These are all set to 0, so you'd only really be able to use this column if every customer on your site is logging in and being assigned a customer ID. If you're forcing that login during the checkout process, then therefore they'll all have an ID, but as I'm not, and as you probably wouldn't be by default on a retail site, you're going to have at least some zeros in there. So what I would recommend, therefore, is the billing email address as the most unique and best identifier. And that's the same for a lot of e-commerce platforms. That's normally what we'd recommend. We've also got the phone, so we could use the billing phone for that. And then the first name and last name, as I mentioned, for EKM are in separate fields. So we can store those here. And all this is doing really is just pulling these bits of data through to different parts of the report. We'll also generate a full customer CSV for you after the report's generated, listing out all your customers and the key metrics in terms of their total spend, their lifetime value, the average time between their orders and so on. So it just kind of accompanies that data. So these fields aren't essential, but it just helps give you that fuller picture and also some usable customer data afterwards. And then customer company, I don't think by default EKM has a company field. No, it doesn't. So we can, apologies, it does, billing company name. There we go, good job, I was paying attention. So you can pull that through there. Now in terms of the custom columns, so what custom columns allow you to do is basically report on additional columns in the report, in your CSV, and generate additional data around that. So you could potentially do things like product name if you've got a small range of products. Quite a common one to use is delivery method, so you can report basically based on delivery method what the lifetime value is for the customer, the average time between the first and second order and so on based on the first order delivery method selected, so we could do that. And then as well, what we'll do is we'll include product name because I've obviously got quite a small range of products here. So what I will do is just include product name there. So even though they're all combined into one line, I think it'll give you kind of some data based on the combination of products ordered. Obviously, that's likely to be too many combinations for this kind of report for most e-commerce stores, but it kind of just gives you a flavour there of what the kind of thing you can specify. And just to say as well, I've said this on other videos, but you can add additional columns manually to your CSV before you upload it to RFM Calc and use that data to generate custom column reports as well, which is really useful. And then all I'm going to do is just give it a little test name here. You've got the option here to anonymize customer data. So if you don't want any real names and email addresses appearing in the report, you can select that there. It doesn't affect the numeric data at all. It just hides basically names and emails from any of the reporting data and the customer CSV as well. And then finally, I'm just going to overwrite the default column mappings. And all that means is that next time I come back to this project and schedule a report, all these columns will already be mapped for me, so I won't have to repeat that. Oh, I thought I'd selected the customer ID. I obviously didn't. Billing email. There we go. Great, so that report's now queued. That'll take a couple of minutes and I'll get an email when the report is generated. And that will show me things like lifetime value, average time between orders, customer cohort analysis, full RFM analysis as well. And that's simple as that. And that will work for any EKM store. All you have to do is just export the data into CSV, upload it into RFM Calc as I've showed, and it's as simple as that. So that's everything I think for today. Hopefully that you found that video useful. So we've touched on today how to export order data from EKM and the little kind of additional module you have to install to allow you to do that. We've then gone through the CSV file in terms of the structure of the file, in terms of all the columns it contains, and had a deep dive into that data. And finally, I've just taken you through how to create a project in RFM Calc for EKM exports and how to schedule a report. So yeah, hopefully you found that useful. In future videos, I'll talk about the report itself and the information that's generated. But that's everything for today. Thanks for watching, and look forward to seeing you on the next video.